Good morning from Brazil. I'm Rogério Tilio from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and I'm here with my colleague Paula Szundy. We are going to present on being critical, ideology and linguistic ideologies in Brazilian educational policies.
So good morning from Brazil, and good afternoon from the Netherlands, and good evening from those in another jet lag. So I'm Paula Szundy, Rogério Tilio's colleague from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And in this presentation about on being critical, we are going to start drawing the theoretical landscapes which inform our views on critical. Afterwards, we are going to focus on the Brazilian curricular framework, common curriculum framework called BNCC, as understanding it as a political arena of conflicts. And then we are going to finish with some hope, talking about spaces for resistances.
So we start with the concept of critical. We would like to start defining how we understand the word critical, because the word critical is a polysemic word. It is very much used in academic context as critical thinking, as a synonym for argumentation. It's very common to have critical thinking skills in writing courses, for example, when and these critical thinking skills refer to the ability students should have of stating arguments. Because we go beyond this meaning of a critical, we are going to discuss how different authors have different concepts for critical. So we bring here Penny Cook, who brings four concepts of critical. The first one, critical thinking, the one mentioned before, the one which is present in academic context, relates to the idea of distancing. So people should keep some distance from the phenomenon in order to understand it. Relating to the argumentation mentioned before, students should get some distancing in order to understand like the two sides of the argument. The weak point of this theory is that it doesn't consider differences, inequalities, and conflicts, as if anyone could be able to get this distancing and see the other sides of the arguments. Another concept of critical brought by Penny Cook is the one of social relevance. According to this concept, to be critical means to understand the social context of the phenomenon. It's true, we have to understand the social context of the phenomenon, but the idea of social relevance here is relevance as adequacy, not as transformation. So another concept of critical is the modernist one, which deals with the idea of ideology critique. According to this concept, being critical means to understand the ideology that is hidden behind discourse. Again, another weak point of this concept is its determinism. Right? We are victims of ideology. There is an underestimation of agency and differences. Structural inequality would be decisive for this phenomenon. And so only some people would be able to see what is hidden. The last concept is the one of problematizing practice, the one which says that being critical means engaging with differences. Only when you engage with differences, you are able to problematize social practices. a weak point here is a certain relativism, but we understand that there is no way out. This is inherent to the idea. Otherwise, we would be objective, and this is not the idea of being critical. There isn't a formula to be critical. Then we bring Sousa Santos' concept of critical proximity, which relates to the idea of engagement with difference. In order to be critical, you don't have to distance from the phenomenon. On the contrary, you have to be close to the phenomenon. You have to engage with differences. In Portuguese, we have this expression, in mundo researcher, which would be the researcher who is in the world and who gets muddy. In mundo means that. So a researcher is not the one who gets isolated in an office thinking about theories. Is the one who really gets in the world and who really gets muddy with the phenomenon. Then we bring queer theory to contribute to our concept of critical. Queer is everything society discourses turn into abnormal, weird, abject, and inferior. Being critical under a queer perspective means constantly challenging what is naturally considered normal. Being critical under a queer perspective also means fighting for education for social justice, an education committed with social change and destabilization of naturalized knowledge. Being critical under a queer perspective also means to challenge representations. Truths are not given. History is not given. They are socially constructed narratives.
So this understanding of critical is pretty much related to the critical pedagogy proposed by the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. So Paulo Freire, throughout his life, defended an education that makes it possible for men the courageous discussion of his problems, of his insertion in these problems, which warns him of the dangers of his time so that his consciousness about them makes him gain force and courage to fight instead of being dragged by the traps of his own self, subdued by alien prescriptions. He defended an education that places him in constant dialogue with others, which predisposes him to constant reviews, to the critical analysis of his findings, to a certain rebellion in the most human sense of expression, which identify him with scientific methods and processes. So this quotation is from a book by Paulo Freire called Education for Liberty. And it's important to note that he uses the word man. And afterwards, almost in the end of his life, Paulo Freire also reviewed this sexist language and apologizes for it. In fact, it was Bell Hooks who called Paulo Freire's attention related to this use of sexist language. So this is an important note here. Paulo Freire's view of education can be related to a social historical perspective of both education and language. In this perspective, pretty much inspired by the circle of Bakhtin, especially by Bakhtin himself, Voloshinov, and Medvedev, there is no escape from ideology. So ideology is an inherent characteristic of utterances. And signs do not only reflect reality, they refract other realities. It also means that although ideology is inherent to discourse, we to understand discourse, we need to go beyond the verbal context. We need to look at history, at the macro context. And then through this perspective, there is no possibility of assuming neutral perspective towards what we perceive and construct as reality and truth. So as defined by Foucault, truth belongs to this world. It's always a construction, and so is reality. And then we also refer to the concept of language ideology, since language cannot be understood outside their real use. So if everything is ideological, language is also ideological, and language ideologies can be understood as beliefs or feelings about language as used in their social worlds, as representations, whether explicit or implicit, that construct our intersections with language in the world. And also, I understand language ideologies as the responsive attitudes about language construed by people in the social world. So in this perspective, the Brazilian National Common Core Curriculum, BNCC, is understood as a political ideological product. And as political ideological products, curricular frameworks and common core curricular frameworks are always ideological and part of an ideological arena where different voices fight for legitimacy. Okay. And then if we think of this specific document, the Brazilian the Common Brazilian National Framework, BNCC was predicted in the Constitution and educational legislation. But also the Brazilian current Constitution is from 1988, and the educational legislations from 1996, BNCC only started to be constructed in 2015. In this period, we have 3 different versions of the document, and the third version was approved by the National Council of Education in December 2017. Debates around the first version of the document took place between September 2015 and March 2016, and this period coincided with the intensification of the political crisis in Brazil, which culminated in President Dilma Rousseff's impeachment in September 2016. Therefore, actions and discourses tried to delegitimize and disqualify the policies of Dilma Rousseff's government. And one of the changes is related to a change in educational legislation in 2017, already in Temer's government, which made English the only compulsory foreign language to be taught in school, which we consider as a colonial perspective. Before that, it's important to point out that it was the schools and communities' role to choose the language to be taught at schools. Also, of course, for geopolitical reasons, English was the most frequent taught language, but Spanish was also frequent in the previous context. And then Spanish was displaced after that. although we are in Latin America. So BNCC as a political and ideological arena is a document which echoes the voices of many social actors, the voices of schools, including teachers, coordinators, directors, parents, students, academic institutions, not only scholars and researchers, but also institutions like the Brazilian Association of Applied Linguistics and others, okay? And also private sectors who are pretty much interested in education, because education is a commodity, and in Brazilian case, a very lucrative commodity, because the school public is huge. So it's common to have disputes around common core curricula. And then many scholars claim that this kind of document, which impose a common core curricula for the country, okay, ignoring the huge variety and the huge differences we have in Brazil, they see this kind of document as documents who makes it impossible the construction of a critical education, because they interrelate this kind of document with liberal principles, with an utilitarian emphasis in the construction of the individual rather than of collective priorities. They see it as documents whose main intention would be to prepare labor force which are destitute of any critical apparatus. But we also see that BNCC, although it may be related to this liberal ideology, also brings some influence of a social historical perspective. This influence make some actors, especially those social actors related to far-right Brazilian groups who largely support our current president, Jair Bolsonaro, claim that BNCC is a document that spoils, damages Brazilian education due to its socialist or communist perspective, whose main aim is to indoctrinate students. Okay, so we have this video from one of these groups claiming that BNCC is a kind of socialist document. In terms of the proposal to English language teaching, BNCC defends a perspective of that English should be taught as a lingua franca, a global language, which can be considered a positive language ideology in the sense that the document problematizes the language ideology which consider native varieties more legitimate and language ideologies related to one nation, one language ideologies, and then opens some space for differences. However, if we look at the organizational axis for English at BNCC, we see a clear focus on autonomous and isolated skills, which are pretty much related to an autonomous views of literacies that doesn't problematize power relations, inequalities, and this kind of things. So these axes are orality, reading, writing, linguistic and grammatical knowledge, and intercultural dimension. And even the intercultural dimension here is related to a global village metaphor, that is, the inequalities provoked by the expansion of English are not problematized. And then to challenge permanences and enhance critical literacies, we propose some strategies for resistance, okay? And these strategies include reinventing practices related to the uses and abuses of semiotic resources in textual trajectories, selecting and preparing activities aimed at educating discourse analysts, and also engage students and teachers in epistemical disobedience as proposed by Miolo, that allows them to unlearn the colonial West logic as the only legitimate one, and also develop ideological literacy practices that problematize issues related to gender identity, sexuality, race, politics, and others that extremist groups, especially the ones related to Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, insist on silence from education. So our reference, thank you very much.
Thank you.